Well, we have all of the pieces together now in order to make our deformable model. We've got our principal component analysis method for extracting the key structures. We have the point distribution method that uses the PCA in order as a way of modeling deforming shapes. We have our structural model that comes from the PCA. We have our statistical model that comes from the multivariate Gaussian. And what we're going to do now is look at how all of this works together when we look at a set of T-shapes that we've been sort of using as examples. So here's a set of our T-shapes, and these are 4 different shapes. You can see they vary. They all look roughly T-shaped, and we've already done all our pre-processing on them and rotated them into the sort of standard position, and once we've got them in our standard position, we can do our principal component analysis trick and build the point distribution model. Now we have 31 examples here, and I guess the first question is, can we actually build a model of all of these T-shapes? And it's going to turn out that yes, we can do that, and we can also recognize some invalid T-shapes as well. So just to sort of remind you, we've got every corner in our T model, in our T shape, okay, has, here, and the T shape is going to be modified by some sort of shape variations. We try to remove the positional variations away from it, and we've already sort of moved it into place. Okay, and we're going to use our point distribution model to do that, and once we've got the point distribution model set up, we're going to look at the variations of the model representation, and that'll be the statistical model that'll tell us what are valid shapes and what are invalid shapes. So here's an example of some of our training data. So these are 16 of the T-shapes that I showed you before. Altogether we have 31 of them. And you can see that they sort of vary a little bit, a little bit off asymmetric, a little bit bent angles. Sometimes the ratio between the head size and the stem size is different. You can see that there's here's a kind of very narrow, sort of thin head or something like that. Anyway, so these are all variations that we would like to be able to somehow represent as examples of the T-shape. If we looked at 2 of the components, so the x1 and x2, remember when we're building the point distribution model, we're going to take the row and column coordinates of the 8 boundary points, and we're going to put it together into one long vector. And if we look at just the first 2 of those components for the 31 shapes, well, we notice that there's a strong correlation between them. They kind of lie almost on a line here. And that immediately says to us, oh, maybe this point distribution model will actually work, because it'll pick out some of the correlation between the shapes and just leave us with a kind of a representation of the structural variation, the important modes of deformation that sort of parameterize really where you lie along this line here. So when we build our point distribution model, we are looking for the eigenvectors and the eigenvalues of this covariance matrix, the scatter matrix. And this is a plot of those eigenvalues. So we've got our 8 points, and each of those points have 2 coordinates. So when we build our point distribution model vector, it has 16 components. So we're working in a 16-dimensional space, and when we do our scatter matrix, we get a scatter matrix with different eigenvalues. And these are the eigenvalues from 1 to 16. We'll get 16 eigenvalues. What you see here is that the first 4 or maybe 5 eigenvalues are all reasonably large, and then the remaining eigenvalues are all pretty small. What that suggests to us immediately is that there's only sort of 4 or 5 real measures of variation in this set of shapes that I've got, and all the rest of it are just kind of noise variations. So we're going to throw those noise variations away, and we're just going to keep the first 5 components as our way of representing it in our point distribution model. In order to get some sort of feeling for what those first 5 modes are encoding, I've shown here a representation that you get with the first 4. I didn't get all 5, just all 4 of them, first 4 here. And so each of the columns runs from -2 to +2 standard deviations around the mean shape. And you can see, like, this column sort of relates to largely the thickness of the head shape. And this column here maybe relates to the this dimension of thickness. And this one is maybe a trade-off between the position of this line right here. It sort of gradually gets further, and this variation seems to relate to the thinness of the stem of the T. Now, there's no particular reason why these particular modes should have come out. It's just a statistical analysis of the data gives something like this. Perhaps a human might have designed the shapes, and when they designed the shapes, they might have built in certain expected variations, and most probably when you did the principal component analysis, if you had enough data, those designed in shapes would also be the shapes that would come out. But with real data, you don't always have any good understanding of exactly what those modes are, and you just end up with a set of modes that you get given. So those, at least for our T-shape, those are the modes of variation. Now, once we project our data down using just the first 5 modes of it, we end up with the 5 weighting coefficients. And what I'm showing here is now the coefficients for the first 2 modes that we've got here. And if you remember back previously, we had a very high correlation between the first 2 components of the vector. Now the first 2 components of the vector are very uncorrelated. It's just a kind of blob. In fact, this is why we use the Gaussian distribution to represent the shapes. Notice there's a kind of circular Gaussian distribution shape sort of around the origin 0, 0 right here. And each of the little crosses represents one of our data points from our training data, and we've also have some bad examples of T's in here as well. And the bad examples that were not used in the training process are correspond to the diamonds. And notice, well, at least 3 of the diamonds are a bit further away from the mean, although there are also 2 that are a bit close to the mean. Okay, but anyway, the important thing is we've got a kind of Gaussian distribution, and we've removed all the correlation between the data. So that's good. If we look at all of the Mahalanobis distances of the training data away from the mean shape, that's this plot right here, and for, all of these lie reasonably close to 0. So 0 would be, it means that exactly on the mean. And what we would maybe like to consider is some sort of threshold which says what's bad data and what's good data. And by using the chi-squared distribution, we can make some prediction about what the 3 sigma test threshold ought to be for this data. And in this case, we're in a 5-dimensional space with the 5 coefficients, so that makes a prediction that 3 standard deviations ought to be about, the threshold ought to be about 6.7. So you can see all of these shapes are well below that sort of threshold, so we've got good shapes here. So now looking at some of the examples of failures. Well, these are some of the shapes that did not make it past either the heuristic rotation into shape, or the segmentation, or finding the 8 different segments. So you can see here we've only got 7 points and 7 segments for these ones. Here we've got an extra one. So some of these heuristics didn't work particularly well. This is a case of a shape that has the right number of segments, but because of its somewhat extreme shape, it didn't get properly rotated into the standard orientation. So that also failed as a recognition case. Here are some more cases. These are the shapes that I consider to be invalid T, so I didn't include them as part of the training data. And you can see they're sort of rather extreme values compared to the 16 that I showed you previously. And our algorithm also says that to some extent they are also extreme values, because here these are the Mahalanobis distances that are associated with each of those shapes. And as I said, the threshold is sort of 6.7, so it's going to clearly throw out this one and this one. This one, for some odd reason, is quite close to the origin. Maybe it's just because generally the shape is okay, it's just a little bit kind of squint. So maybe it's within the model that we've built, maybe it's okay. Maybe we needed more training data to get a more refined model. And these other ones are more extreme shapes, and their Mahalanobis distance is clearly pretty large compared to the other samples that we've had. So what have we got right here? Well, we've seen a little bit of analysis about the eigenvalues, and that tells us something about how we can make a simplified model of our shapes in the point distribution modeling approach. So we don't really need to use all the eigenvectors to build our model. In this case, we only needed 5 of the 16. And we've also seen how by using these principal components, we can encode the different kinds of modes of variation that are present in the data. And that's part of the core of the point distribution model approach. And we've also seen some examples of objects, the shapes that can be recognized and also the shapes that can be thrown out using our statistical model. Thank you very much.